So welcome to the Digital Economist from the World Economic Forum here in Davos, Switzerland. We are holding our inaugural roundtable, and we're very excited to have a huge turnover and a highly curated roundtable. The Digital Economist is an impact platform focused on thought leadership and bringing investable opportunities in alignment with the Sustainable Development Goals to the fore. So we're very excited to welcome folks on January 23rd this evening, and looking forward to great partnership and a lot of value we create for the community along the way. So welcome.
But glad to have you here. So I was, let's start with, you have worked, your work has been on an intersection of so many different things. And I was trying to, catch which is the topic we should begin with. So maybe I think we should start with, your own introduction in terms of how you look at the world and how your journey has been so far.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to start. Particularly because we're all in a journey that doesn't have a straight line, and I can at least share mine, and it's always nice to look back and see how I end up and how we end up where we are, and I think that's also a very important part for entrepreneurs. As a starter with such an international cohort, I come from Argentina, from Buenos Aires, and if we're going to have a fireside chat in Argentina, we're going to drink mate. So obviously, I'm well prepared. It's our tea that wakes you up in the morning and gets you going through the day. I was raised in Buenos Aires until I was around 18, and then I moved to the U.S. for college, basically. And one of the things that I noticed growing up is that I liked a lot of things, and I was very interested in so many different fields and disciplines, and so it was already stressful to me about what I should study, and that's one of the reasons that brought me to the United States, to think about, can the college format that gives you 2 years to do a little bit of everything would help me figure out exactly the path, because at 17 or 18, I was not ready to tell the world I'm an architect, I'm an economist, I'm a business person, I'm a doctor. It just didn't make any sense to me, at least from my profile. And so the path then took me to, and I always say it's like very surprising, because I just open up myself to see what comes up, and then I find the message to say, okay, I have to go that way. I started getting very interested in biology in the movement from high school to college, because biotechnology was really boosting up, and genomic sequencing was becoming a very, very important thing. And at the same time, there's a part of me that wanted to be an actor. And so I was like, well, maybe I should go to LA and think about whether to look at studying biology or giving a shot at acting. And something amazing happened in college, that I took a class that changed my path, which is a class on Astro-Biology and geomicrobiology. And I always say that kind of like helped me not necessarily shape how I think. It helped me realize the shape of my thinking. and one of the key aspects is that astrobiology is about life in other planets, and it's really about how life emerges in this planet. And the heart of it is understanding how microbiology survives in a planet, but also affects the planetary atmosphere. And this planet has a beautiful story. And so I heard the story of our planet from a 4.5 billion year perspective, and that really made me change the way that I saw my position and my context as a person. And one of the big things about the context was also time, because part of that story is around microbes evolving in extreme environments, but then producing photosynthesis, creating oxygen in the atmosphere, producing ozone after reacting with the sun, and then protecting all life from UV radiation, which leads to more life. And so the Gaia theory of how the planet becomes a living organism made me realize that if I was able to, the powerful thing was thinking in terms of systems and the system of the microbe, because I was studying microbial physiology, was just as important as the planetary. And that macro relationship was very, very key. And until this day, almost everything I do are about nested systems. And I think that's also very important as we think about our path as individuals and as entrepreneurs, is always understanding the context in which we are, and then coming back to our point to see where to drive forward. So that led me to surprisingly end up working in a lab doing microbiology, but the pristine conditions of our planet after billions of years of balance were being disrupted and are being disrupted by our activity with our energy and fossil fuel practice that changes billions of years in just 60 years. And literally the last 60 years have been super clear in our atmospheric CO2 records. And so looking at the math, it was like, wow, this is our generation. It's not like a problem that we will have for our kids. No. We're going to be alive while this is happening. And that to me was a beautiful call to action. And I remember being a college student and saying, this is something that's worth me embarking on. And it's again, like going back to the context of where we are as entrepreneurs, because we get to have the responsibility and the decision of our actions, and the broader context and social and environmental impact is part of what help us realize which are the causes that we're best suited for, in some sense, why are we here for. I say that there's two important days in our lives. One when we're born, and the second one is when we realize why. And some of these big challenges are about that second day, right? But also connecting it to some of the skills that we bring. Now, around that time, I noticed that thinking about the climate problem, that the issue for me intuitively was not economic. Like, it was not that we didn't have enough money to fund an energy transition, and it was not technological in some sense, because there's a lot of actions that could be done that were not being done and still not being done at the speed needed. And to me, I related to well, the problem is we have a very big business engine behind coal, oil, and gas that is designed to maximize profit. And there was something inside my mind that said that has to change. It's very hard to mobilize an energy system if you have something a system that's already optimized for extracting as much from the ground. And I didn't have specific political economy ideas, so it was not like I was influenced from a more leftist or rightist mindset when it comes down to business and the role of corporations. In fact, my grandfather was an entrepreneur and a business person, but there was just something in the context of the planet that made me think about business, and that's when I started realizing that we needed to come up with new forms of business entities, and went back to Argentina. And I wanted to start I used to call social enterprises back then because it wasn't a defined term, like a non-profit corporation or commercial nonprofit or something like that. I was trying to come up with words to explain that the important area between the purely for-profit Delaware corporation and the nonprofit. And that was a very important path to me because the first thing I did is I picked up a graphic tool and I started designing a brochure for a company. And it was in one night that I realized that I could be an entrepreneur because I could tell the story about the firm that I wanted to develop, that I thought the world needed. And in one night, first I was like, oh, and I'm really enjoying graphic design. And I knew that because I had a bit of a, artistic background. Until this day, using Adobe Illustrator, using InDesign, using even like Keynote has been one of the most important tools that I've had as an entrepreneur. And so that's always one tip. Because in some sense, we always have to tell a story of the project that we want to create. And we have to also create a healthy ego because it's how are others going to see it. So I did that for 6 years, and I'm doing my autobiography. Arvinder, stop me if
no, this is interesting. I have some very interesting questions coming up for you. Okay. But yeah, this is interesting. Please go ahead.
Awesome. Because it's also my path of discovering myself as an entrepreneur. There was a part of me that was pushing myself to be as an entrepreneur from a point of view of outrage. Outrage on the business side is like there needs to be something different when the planetary problems are this, but also of inspiration, right? For 6 years as an entrepreneur, to me, that's in Argentina. My first company is called Wake Up, Live Consciously, Wolcon Energy. So I wanted to escond into it something around spiritual awakening. And for me, when I talk about spirit, it's just something that connects us all, and everyone can read it from their own angle. And it's a great university being an entrepreneur because every day you have to learn something new. And so to me, it was a great way for me to learn about renewable energy, sustainability, and play with business model ideas. I realized that I could draw business models and business units the way that I would draw metabolisms in microbes and in biological systems. And until this day, and then when I go into my PhD chapter, my most relevant work has been on using metabolic thinking into business system thinking. I can't say that I was an in general successful first-timer entrepreneur. In fact, what I noticed that I was also being too much of a researcher as an entrepreneur, and I'm still. I normally say I'm too much of a researcher as an entrepreneur, and I'm too much of an entrepreneur as a conventional researcher. And so I'm always in the gray area. Because I was also often focused on not just what the client wanted, but what I thought the client needed. And so I would spend a lot more time working on what I thought the client needed and not necessarily what the client said they wanted. And that was part of my risk of a bit of consulting. You put a lot of time into what you think the project needs. And this was all kinds of projects, whether it's corporate consulting, whether it's designing a house that's off the grid in the Andes. But eventually I then launched another company on forest conservation, and that was probably one of my biggest and most beautiful slap in the faces as an entrepreneur. I started a restaurant and a tourism retreat to raise funds for a UN-led forest conservation initiative. So many moving parts and in such few time. That was one of the first 2 restaurants I also started as an entrepreneur. I probably won't do it again. The food industry is should not be underestimated. Let me put it this way. But that kind of project that didn't work out and made me feel like I needed to zoom out in context drove me to do my PhD. And so I went to Australia, and my PhD focused on the theory behind what I was just doing for the last 6 years, which is how do we transform our entire energy system, focusing on business. And so I created a framework for the energy business system using complex system thinking, and it helped me pick up the tools of systems thinking, which I was already using, because they're very intuitive. We are complex systems, and we understand all the different moving parts, but often it's good to have a map, a framework. And so on one part, diving deep into the notion of the evolution of corporate law and the role that corporate law has in a firm, particularly in the oil and gas sector, in the context of planet Earth, and the feedbacks between businesses and Earth, in the same way that I had, looking back, understood the feedbacks between microbes, bacteria, and the atmosphere. And then the other part is more deep into, what are disruptive business models that can change the mindset, the paradigm in the energy business? And that led me to smart grids. And how do we envision a bottom-up community aggregated utility where your houses, your offices, your factories are all connected under a virtual power plant where you're constantly doing arbitrage between your solar panel, your batteries, your consumption, your HVAC systems, all talking to each other. And that led me to really also diving into the emerging digital technology space, because that's all IoT, AI. And then when I bumped into distributed ledger technologies, the first thing that I would thought it was fascinating, and it took me a while to even consider blockchain, because I thought it was something that was happening in the monetary space. But as soon as I saw it in legal space, I was like, aha. And it's when I looked at the concept of a decentralized autonomous organization, to me, it was a programmable company. And so my work was on like, how do we redesign the fundamental company contract of a firm and a contract with society. And if we're able to digitally templatize that contract in the firm, we're able to address some of the macro issues that collective firms have with our planet. And that was my entry into the let's say the blockchain wormhole. And by that time in my career, it was apparent that the fusion between entrepreneurship and research and academia was at the heart of what I was interested in. Using academic research to then segue into a business actually helps bring in a lot of more patience into the ideas. Rather than you have an idea, you go out next day to be an entrepreneur, and you suddenly realize you have to focus on how do you make money for the next 3 months, rather than really understanding your idea and the focus of it. And that also could be an issue. That led me to, in the context of going to Yale very often, my wife was doing her master's degrees there, realizing that there was a great opportunity at Yale to set up an environment of the fusion between academia and entrepreneurship. Things that MIT and Stanford have understood a while ago, but more conservative universities like Yale have not. And so it's like, well, this is a great opportunity for me to bring this. And so I started the Open Innovation Lab, and I've been doing that for 2 years, but also with the idea of spinning it off, because it also, from my mindset, it couldn't come from one organization. Well, what if we bring in all the top universities and the top minds in the world to address our existential challenges? And so, to me, that's always been a path of a blueprint to thinking about what that macro organization is. Our focus has been on climate accounting and climate financing, at least in the last couple of years. And then this year, the exciting part of my path has been to launch the Open Earth Foundation as a nonprofit that, in some sense, helps spin off the Yale Open Lab to be able to operate at scale in the real world. Or not the Open Lab, because the Open Lab still exists, the projects that we've been incubating that are all open source. because also operating in the lens of the university in the real world is complicated. Signing a contract with the university, from the university, hiring people. And this is all around digital public goods, platforms that help us better manage our macro system, planet Earth. And that led me to being here, talking to you. So I think that's the wraparound. Thank you for your patience in walking with me through this beautiful path.
That's excellent. I think that's very exciting. I think my own realization about how we look at the world and our connectedness to it, was that realization happened when I watched Cosmos for the first time, Carl Sagan's, and it was pretty interesting perspective. I mean, you start to realize like how little you are, within the frame of time, but how important that little green blue dot is, right? So I think when I was looking at your profile and I'm listening to your journey, I think one of the things that kind of pops out is this idea of ecological economy. So I think I want to dig a little bit deeper. Entrepreneurship and social good sometimes is seen as two opposite sides of the spectrum. You can think about the current entrepreneurship that it depends on the ideas of scale, and scale comes through homogeneity and centralization of resources, right? But that creates equity concentration if you think about it, right? Sustainability is sort of considered as the opposite end of it, right? So my question to you is can entrepreneurship actually solve the ideas of sustainability, or because what we are disrupting is this local exchange of commodities and values, and taking it to scale, right? So what are your thoughts about sustainability and how you look at sustainability and entrepreneurship? Because some of the things that you have done is in that direction, right?
Yeah, and I would say, to answer your question of can entrepreneurship address the issues of sustainability, not only the answer is yes, but it is its responsibility to do so. So we have a responsibility as entrepreneurs to sort that out, because it's in the creativity of the business model where we say, how can we create a sustainable economic revenue flow into the organization that produces social and environmental good. And if producing deep social and environmental good for all is not compatible with actually a sustainable cash flow, then there's something wrong in our system. And so we really have to then be an entrepreneur to change the system so that it can. And I feel like I've been doing a bit of that. So I think the responsibility is pushing ourselves to be creative into finding those good kind of like Goldilocks areas where you are focusing in something that makes sense commercially, but that you're also starting with how do we address a problem.
Yeah.
And I tend to be over optimistic about turning products and services into commercial opportunities. And therefore, I think that one should start with what's the problem that I'm trying to solve? What's the solution? What's the product and service for that solution? Okay, how do I make money out of that products and services to continue being able to deliver it and improve it? So the quick answer is yes, and we have to push ourselves to constantly find the balance.
I think you raised a very good point there, is that we have to find creativities of business models, right? I think one of the things I typically think about is, as we look at the current, much of the current business models and much of the current funding systems, many a times we outsource, the idea of resources and resource, where we're getting the resources from, and that creates like sort of this, as organizations are becoming more global, it's creating this more, some sort of imbalance, because sometimes the benefiters of that equity are not typically in the same place as where those resource allocation is happening. But let's I want to get back to another point that you mentioned earlier. You are a person of so many different worlds, right? The creative aspect of things, and working in environment and astrobiology. So I think as people who realize, and entrepreneurs, that's happened with a lot of entrepreneurial journey, when they start to realize they can do a lot of different things. How did you go through that journey of being noticed or being taken seriously for being interested in so many different things, right? Because I see that struggle with a lot of people who are interested in these diverse kind of things to create impact, especially because of they're interested in so many different things.
I love that question. And it's funny because particularly as I go into the entrepreneur world and I'm focusing on many different projects and I'm bringing different parts of myself, and we were just talking about this before, you're describing as I'm a person of many different disciplines. We all are. We all have our different things. We are never unidimensional beings. So that's very important that we bring that to our work. And I always say, my father struggled a lot with understanding what do I do, and people ask, what does your son do? And he's like, I have no idea. And to him, and I'm giving the example of him because it's mostly the paradigm of our previous generations, and this is part of also our responsibility to break into a new paradigms. If you're focusing on, you're in a lot of different places, then you're not focusing on one thing. And I think that we now see the importance of generalists in ecosystems and in projects, and generalists also to lead organizations. I in some sense struggled with the fact that I was not being taken seriously, exactly how you said it, because I was not focusing on something. And in a sense that, in my lens, I was focusing on something. I was very specific on what I was focusing on from a macro lens and bringing all these things to that, because that focus was the purpose. And then all the other things are just tools for that specific purpose. But that was hard to convey. I think that I had to be true to my commitment and saying there's something about this that feels right. And even though I'm not being taken seriously, I have to keep going and work harder so that I can be taken seriously for either two reasons. Either the business that I'm running is successful, and so no matter what judgment people had to do before, if you're making money, if the company is doing well from the old school mindset, then we're going to take you seriously. And the other one is that you have academic traction or recognition. And so I think that's also why I was like, well, I'll do a PhD. If I can't make a multi-million-dollar company that shows the value of social entrepreneur, at least let me write papers about it. Because I was trying to say, how do I get the world to take me seriously? So I've been struggling with that, but not so much a struggle, because I think that struggle is more of like a nice challenge of being able to show it. And then I bump into places later on in my career, like the MIT Media Lab, when it's a box that says, "Hey, we've been waiting for you. We know that you don't fit in the normal traditional places, and this is how Navroop and I connected." And it's very important for places like that to exist and to tell us that if we are musicians and computer scientists and have a deep passion for economic thinking, that there's places for us to bring all those things together and to work with people from different disciplines. And obviously, in a place with the prestige of MIT, then it's a thank you to recognizing the importance of these models. And that helped me a lot. I actually bumped into the Media Lab before I started the Open Innovation Lab at Yale. And there's a little bit of exclusivity on it that also was interesting, but it made me think about, well, this is a validated model that has the recognition, the prestige. And so I was inspired by that to start the Open Lab at Yale. So, and then now I think, it's a bit easier, but yeah, I empathize with this issue, and I think that just being, if it feels that this is the right path, that it doesn't matter if the other people doesn't take us seriously. And also, if we know that we're doing something that's good for the world, that's enough, because we're taking ourselves seriously.
Yeah, I think the two words that I kind of take as hooks from that conversation is the idea of the vision and the threshold, right? There is a certain threshold. And I think even as an entrepreneur, right, you're trying to bring the idea that you have in your head to this world. So you're giving a birth to an idea, and that gestation period is where you're consistently striving to break the threshold, where the world is sort of not against you, but it doesn't care, right, for the idea that you have. And I think there's a certain time when you kind of break that threshold, and suddenly you realize a completely different world opens up, right? So, I'm just curious if you also felt there was a certain moment where you were like, oh, now it's all coming together, to create something, or it was a consistent sort of journey?
Great question. From my lens, and I think that this is how it is all the time, because our path can be one and the same, but it's kind of like a double helix, it's like these series of waves, and it feels like you're in an expansive mode, and then there's like contraction mode. And that is also how complex adaptive systems work. There's a constant collapse and reconfiguration. Our cells are constantly dying and replicating themselves.
Don't worry about
I was trying to mute TV. That sounds beautiful. It sounds like kids playing in the back.
If you're able to get us some diapers, and this happens every 2 weeks.
I think you're a host.
Can you? Okay.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I guess you can.
Okay.
Great.
Sorry about that.
No worries. We were talking about the cycles of change, and this is a good example. We have to constantly adapt, right? And in my sense, when I decided to be an entrepreneur, or it's not like a decision, but get pushed, it was in those moments, everything that happened in the past coalesces and it makes sense into one point. And then there's other moments when I decide to do a PhD, and what that PhD is about, when it feels that way. And the other one is when I decide to also put all of that into a lab, or now this year of putting that into a nonprofit. So every time we start something, we need to be in that position, because it's also a big push of giving birth, that we have to look back. And this is I think one of the best things I've heard Steve Jobs say. You always make those connections looking backwards, where it's like, oh, all of that made sense because it led me to the point in time where I am now, and I'm going to channel all of it to this new creation. And so it doesn't happen at one time. There's different intensities, but they're constant cycles, because as soon as you launch that, then you go into an expansive phase. And at some point, you have to also collapse and reconfigure and see where did that journey end up and what's the new cycle. And in that new cycle, you also have to do that again. So we have to think that we have constant cycles. Individuals, our projects, our startups have to go through those cycles. And we have to look back and make those connections to realize where the best direction of the next step goes.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I think we have about 12 more minutes, so we'll open it up for some questions. So the first question comes from Joel. Joel, do you want to ask the question yourself?
So my first question is, seeing that you've done many different things in your life, if you were to do it all again, what would you do differently and why?
Honestly, my honest answer is nothing. I wouldn't do anything different. And I think that if I would, then I would be coming from a place of regret. And if I'm coming from a place of regret, then then I'm already putting some guilt on myself. And there's also, and if I'm able to not do that, then I can embrace trust. Trust that what the path that I had and the path where I'm now is the path where I need to be. Even though it can be filled with challenges and deceptions and frustrations, that I have trust that's the path, because there's lessons there that I need to learn. And so it's a bit philosophical, but I cannot think of and I've thought about this question a lot. And even at some point when I was being an entrepreneur, I was like, when I learned about, for example, industrial engineering, and I was like, well, instead of studying biology, what could I have studied? Well, I was like, maybe I would have studied industrial engineering, because I would have understood processes and business. And I do a lot of processes and business thinking today. But thinking in systems like a living system really has made it very special. And the failed startups where I was like, I would do that differently. Those are all lessons that I can do on the next ones. And if I wouldn't have failed, then I wouldn't learn that lesson. So I really encourage everyone to ask this question, but then make your own insight to realize that nothing different. The universe is perfect in the chaos that it has, and it's balanced in its way, and we can trust that we are in the right path. And from there, that trust boosts us forward, because otherwise I cannot go forward if I have to go back and change the paths. Right? I get stuck. Otherwise, it's like, well, I've learned from the past, thanks to that past, and I can bring that energy into my path forward.
I think that's a very good way of putting it. There in Punjabi, the language that is native to where I was born, there is this word called pana, and the word means acceptance, within life, and embracing the acceptance. And it also goes, kind of similar to, there was a long time back I read the poem by Robert Frost about the road in the yellow, the road not taken, right? It always, I think, life is like fractals, and it opens up different things as you make those choices. And I think the whole point of thinking back of what would have happened, it would have been a completely different context, and the same opportunities would have not popped up. So, yeah, very good way of putting it. Pardon?
No, I love the question because it gets us to talk about it.
Chidi said, do you believe the renewable energy will replace fossil fuels anytime soon? If fossil fuels doesn't taper out in the next 100 years, do you think we will replace it with cleaner sources of power, especially in developing or emerging economies?
It goes back to a bit of the comment on whether entrepreneurs can address sustainability, and my answer was like, it's our responsibility to do so. And so it's our responsibility to make sure that clean sources of fuels replace hydrocarbon fuels. And it's such a noble goal that it's worth us giving it our best. Because if we don't, we create irreversible damage in a unique planet. No other planet in our solar system is as unique and life-sustaining as this. We don't know from our traditional science any other planet. And it really goes into that perspective when you realize it's priceless. We can think about carbon pricing and and economic incentives and things like that, but to me, I've never thought like a traditional economist, but I don't. I just it's a bit of it where it's like, well, when you think in terms of the planet, it's priceless. And so that's the first part, right? The responsibility of making it happen and visualizing that we're going to get to net zero emissions in the next 30 years. and we're going to have our emissions in the next 10 years, and that we're going to achieve that by understanding that as a civilization, we are all connected. We're all part of this broader system. And a lot of what's been happening now is that we're pushed into energies of division. More my country, your country, my religion, your religion, my race, your race, my company, your company. And whilst at some level there's that division, at a bigger level we're not. We're all part of the same stakeholders of the same thing, and that's the type of thing that we need to pick up to be able to work together to make that vision happen, and bring us all into awareness of how important and pristine the planetary environment is. From a technological standpoint, obviously there's much I can say about that. Renewable energies are already more cost effective than fossil fuels, and they are a phenomenal job creation. And so right now in the post-COVID, or we're still on COVID, but if we think about the post-COVID economic situation and social situation, we have to think about how to create jobs, and how do we think about making everyone an entrepreneur in the climate space. It's really, I think the perfect analogy is the New Deal. What is our new industrial vision and job creation vision that we want to see, and nothing better than transforming our entire energy infrastructure and finding models that can empower everyone to be part of that transition. So yes, and yes, but it's not easy.
Yeah, I think there seems to be a consensus even within the markets. I mean, if you start to look at the markets in the past a year or so, and if you look at where is actually the economy or the money kind of flowing in, it is in the new energy sector, and the way the fossil fuel energy sector is doing right now, it's never been this bad. So there's that. The other thing, I think you mentioned it in a very good way, which is that when you're starting to think as an entrepreneur about where the value creation should happen, you should start to think about all of the different components, and not just individuals or societies or countries. We also have a very good word for it. It's called the idea of sarbat, where the idea is like everything is inclusive. You don't exist as an entity, but you exist as a whole, where you're connected with the environment, everything.
Yeah, beautiful.
Our next question comes from Ranjini. Ranjini, you wanna ask the question yourself?
Sure. Hi, Martin. Thanks for being here. I'm actually working on a fintech marketplace that's exploring blockchain for payment rails, and I was really curious about the work that you've done with Open Solar, and was fascinated by the way that that you've managed to structure kind of these individual projects peer-to-peer using Stellar. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the Open Solar project, and a little bit more about the financial structure.
Sure. To me, that project also has its own story, because a lot of my focus in my PhD was on, and still is, on creating a peer-to-peer, let's say, utility business model called, I frame it as a social virtual energy network, using the concept of a virtual power plant, where multiple energy units behave as a single functional unit for the market, and for the grid. So when we started the project Open Solar, and this was basically at the MIT Media Lab, a colleague of mine was already working on the idea of blockchain for community microgrids. And around that time, Hurricane Irma and Maria crossed Puerto Rico and took down the grid. And so it was like the perfect opportunity, perfect storm to find a way of scaling up community microgrids. But then it was really working with the people on the ground, so the community itself, to understand what were the requirements. What did they need? And that was very helpful to think about that before producing microgrids, we need to finance the devices, the solar, the battery. Those are the first atomic units that need to be financed. And then once those are all aggregated, they actually can become a business model, a cooperative energy business model. And so for them, the grid made a lot of sense, but they needed to own the first device. And so then that led to, okay, what are the current ways in which we finance solar in the US? And that's through large pools of capital to access the investment tax credit, which basically subsidies that the investors have for energy infrastructure, and then put into large holdings of third-party ownership of solar, where the investors own the solar and you just pay a power purchase agreement for 20 years. And that model for the community did not really work, because then you just pay your power purchase agreement, but then you can't segue into a microgrid. And so that led to thinking about how to automate a pay-to-own. And pay-to-own models are particularly relevant and more common in places like Africa than in the United States. I mean, in the US, pay-to-own is just the mortgage on your rent. But it's basically turning it into infrastructure, into decentralized infrastructure. And so that led to, okay, how do we automate and how do we bring in sensors to drive the relationship between the investors, the developers that install the system, and the off-taker, the recipient of the hardware. And that started creating a bit of that triad. And then at the heart would be the contract. And the contract, there was something that my colleague Michael Casey, who he was a senior advisor at the Digital Currency Initiative. He's now the chief content officer at CoinDesk. And he was the one that started the project initially. He kept talking about, I think he framed it as smart devices or smart infrastructure, where the contract is attached to the hardware. And so I was like, oh, that's a beautiful concept. And so the solar panel needs to have its own contract and pass from hands to hand. And so then we situated the contract in the project itself, and then everyone just circles around it. And just drawing this, and this is very relevant for everything we do, drawing these systems and these relationships just help think about where blockchain, distributed ledger technologies, automation, digital tools help us in the process. So you got a sensor and you got payments, and just doing a lot of whiteboarding at MIT really helped us kind of flesh this out. And Stellar, it's just a little bit more consequential. Our first test was with Ethereum, and then there was a company that we were collaborating called Neighborly that was exploring out of the I don't know if this is a verb of making something atomic. It's not automation, but it's atomation of municipal bonds. Bonds that, rather than having a face value, that you could chop it into different pieces. And they were looking at Stellar just because of speed of transaction and cost and da. So we looked into it and we thought it made sense. But we have to design the platform in a way that it can operate with different fintech ecosystems. And I also think that that's where we have to think about these things, rather than like, which one's the ecosystem? Is it a Stellar? Is it a Quorum? Is it Ethereum? Is it, they all have their own pros and cons. We have to think about our digital architecture in a way that it focuses on the solution, but that can API into these systems, and then you can just connect to it, adjust your handlers and your contracts, and then set it up in your server, and then run. And if in another place it's better to connect it with another ecosystem, then it should take you a couple of months of development, and you should be able to transition into that other ecosystem. And then we can really nerd out about these things.
Thank you so much, Martin. And that brings our fireside chat to close. We've almost run out of time. But thank you so much, Martin, for taking the time to come and interact with our EITs. I hope they learned a lot, and I'm inspired by your story, and I'm inspired by the things that you do. I hope the others in the group did that as well, and we hope that this interactions will have more opportunities to bring you in to have further discussions and further mentoring to TD.
Yes, please. It's really exciting to be here. It's this is my a beautiful way also to start the day and having a chat with all of you. And I'd love to, if we do this again, that we can also, I'd love to hear a bit more about you guys as entrepreneurs. Where are your pain points? Where are your challenges? And I guess my final comment in that is, I think it's very important for us to constantly observe ourselves in the entrepreneur's path and look at ourselves and pay attention to a couple of things. What level of injustice or imbalance or things around the world are we really fired up by? And we can understand firing up in different ways. Outrage, anger, those very strong emotions we have are very important. Because that's also part of the fuel. My mother-in-law has a podcast called Outrage and Optimism, and she says optimism is the direction, but outrage is the fuel. And when we look at the world in challenge, we have to connect and see those things. If I'm very, outraged about some things that are happening in the world, but my startup is about something else, pay attention to that, because it may make sense for you to connect those things. The second thing is, if your startup is around this, but on your Saturdays, you do your hobby, that when you do it, you lose track of time. Pay attention to that, because when you're doing something that you step out of time and you could do it for hours, that's probably where your startup should be also. Because that's something where you come in coded for doing that. And so pay attention to those two things and see if you can fuse your project, your business model in a way that fuses both what you do, that when you do it, you lose track of time, but that also is fueled by the outrage you have about changing a specific problem. And hopefully that helps you guys, because we have to constantly make adjustments into our path every day. There's different cycles. There's daily cycles, there's monthly cycles, there's yearly cycles, and we have to constantly do a bit of that insight. So hopefully that's something that also can help you on your path. I'm open to future sessions. Any way that I can help, particularly if eventually you guys do a demo day or something, a share out of the different projects. Love to participate.
Definitely, we'd love to invite you on the demo day. And thank you for the very sagely advice. Navroop, any last words you want to add?
I'm a little speechless. Everybody needs to hear this in the world, is how I feel. So I think we have a lot of quotes. We have just an amazing, fascinating journey, Martin. Thanks so much for sharing this with us today. And I think all of us know you and your journey and what you do and why you do it so much better. And we'll continue to work together on the how of it, right, which changes every day, like you said. So thanks again, and we will definitely loop you in. And for the EATs, feel free to reach out to us if you are interested in chatting with Martin further, or even directly Martin, if that's okay with you. To a lot more inspiring journeys to come.
Great. Yes, thank you, Navroop, for the invitation. Thank you, Arvinder, for walking us through this amazing fireside chat, having my mate, and to all of you for also bringing a lot of inspiration that has really helped me really enjoy the session. Good luck on your path, and yes, please let me know how else I can be of service.